Hi, folks. You're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and Neil Geddes Ward. Neil, how are you?
I'm fine, Andy. How are you?
Pretty good. I've had two Mandela effects, which we spoke to before recording this. For those who don't know what the Mandela effect is, it's whereby there's two versions of what this could be. Either the scientific kind of like mainstream version will be that people misremember things, remember things differently or wrongly, incorrectly. And the other version, which I prefer, is that reality is very, very strange and glitchy, and there could be some kind of shifting in realities. So yeah,
Is it just
delve
not a
down.
case of post-Christmas drinks or something? Or
No, I was pretty sober actually over Christmas. Yeah, I barely drink
okay.
anyway these days. But
So what was your Mandela effects then? What's gone wrong?
one of the glitches in reality was on my Facebook feed. Was that Tom Baker's birthday popped up, and there was "Happy Birthday, ex Doctor Who star Tom Baker." In my reality, he died maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and in my mind, there was a whole obituary about how wonderful he was and his life and everything, and I thought, oh, that's sad. But no, he's still alive. Apparently, he's still alive. So
Oh
that's
my
the
God.
first. I mean, I don't want him dead. Of course, I don't want him dead. But it's just like he died. I'm sorry, he died 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know. I mean, he's getting on a bit anyway. If he's 80, this month, then fine. But he died. I just don't get it. And the second glitch in reality is I was watching that 1970s sitcom, Are You Being Served?
Oh yeah.
And the names came up, and Wendy Richard came up, and this is the lady who played Pauline Fowler in EastEnders. I'm sorry, but in my reality, she was always Wendy Richards with an
Yeah.
S.
Yeah. Me
Wendy
too. Yeah.
Richards. Apparently not. Apparently no
Yeah.
longer in this reality.
I think it's because my take on that is that maybe the surname of Richards is not too uncommon, and I've heard of
Mm.
people that name. So you just assume in your head a kind of lazy assumption that it's Richards because the name comes up on the credits. You look at it briefly, it's Wendy Richards, but then it's Wendy Richard, and you confirmed it, sort of thing. But yeah,
It's bizarre.
yeah,
I tell you,
yeah.
one of the first things I'm going to do when I pass over, and hopefully there's going to be an afterlife. I believe there is an afterlife, and if we get all the access to answers for all things in life, one of the first things I'm going to go to in the Akashic records of wisdom and knowledge is what the hell is going on with the Mandela effect.
Yeah.
All of these things, because you could just tick them off, all these things that you thought were one way and they're just not, and it's just mad.
I think I'm going to get into trouble actually when I pass over and
What
go
is
to the
that?
Akashic Records. Well, because I think I've got to take my book back. It's overdue.
Did you actually, funny enough, did you see in the news recently there was a woman who took a book back something like 75 years later or
Oh
something?
wow!
I
It
think
must have
it
been
might
in
be.
her family, way back or something.
I think
Bloody
from
hell.
memory, again, this could talk about memories, Mandela effects. I think it was a New York story. I think it was a lady in New York that returned a book something like 70 years later after she got it
Oh
out.
my
Can you imagine
God.
the fine on that?
Yeah, I think they would have perhaps let her off it.
Probably
Well, maybe the fine was actually in old money, so it might have
yeah.
been like
Oh, that's it. Yeah,
dollars total of 75 years,
couple of
because
cents.
that was the contractual agreement. If you don't return the book, then we're going to charge you like 5 cents a week or something like that in
Can
those
you imagine
days.
that?
Yeah.
Do they
Uh,
account for inflation? This is the thing.
yeah, I do remember us having a library book back. We kept getting letters from the library saying, please return. And it got to the point it was just too embarrassing to take it back. But then they have these amnesties, don't they, where you return it. So I returned the library
Amnesty,
book along with my guns.
like a knife and gun amnesty library book.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I did meet Tom Baker years and years and years ago because
Did
he
it?
came to a village round here called Charlton St Giles in
Yeah.
Buckinghamshire, and they had like a village fete. It was like literally had been Doctor Who maybe for a year, and he was really popular.
Mm.
And he was like the guest of honor at this Doctor Who kind of fete thing, Charlton St Giles show. So he arrived in the Bessie car, which was actually a throwback to the John Pertwee era. But he came up in that. Someone drove him around the field, and we all queued up to get his autograph, and the crowd crowded around him. And yeah, it was really cool. I got his autograph and everything. And yeah, God, the fact that there was Doctor Who, and that's the only Doctor Who I've ever seen in real life. I mean, obviously there's people that go to these conventions and things like that. I'm not really into the conventions of Star Trek and Doctor Who and stuff. Although
Tom Baker.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
But he used to be a monk, by the way. Did you know that? Yeah, he was. Before being Doctor Who, he worked on a building site. And prior to that, he was a monk. But he was also in, I think it was the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. Right. He played the kind of, I don't know, Middle Eastern, Turkish, Arabian baddie with a turban, who was like the evil magician that used to cast the spells. And there was like, if you remember the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, there was a 6-armed statue that came to life with swords called Kali, and he was the one that summoned her. And he had a disguise on with a beard, and you just didn't realise, obviously, because he wasn't Doctor Who at that time, so you didn't really know who he was. But it's only retrospectively you look back and think, oh my God, that's Tom Baker, you know. But he obviously didn't get masses of work because they ended up working on a building site, carrying bricks for people.
Yeah.
Terrible,
How long
wasn't
was he a monk for, and what order was he in? Was he in a silent order or not?
Probably about a week. No, I don't know. I don't know how long he studied to be a monk. I just remember reading it in some of his, historical notes. He might have tried it for maybe a couple of years or something like that. But I think he was just too much of he couldn't keep quiet, or couldn't behave, or whatever he had to do. Couldn't get up early in the morning, whatever, to make the honey and mead.
Oh, I can't be bothered with this.
Exactly. Well, I suppose we better get to the task in hand then, and see who we've got as our guest this month. So I'll press the magic button and bring him in. And it's James Brodie. Welcome, James, to the Paranormal Peep Show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Hello, James.
Hello there.
Thank you for coming on. Now, just for the people that don't know, I met James back in December when I did a talk at the Birmingham UFO group, and I was doing my talk on aliens on the moon. And so that went down well, I understand. And so James came up and spoke to me and said that he was going to be doing a talk for January, which was on Universal Harmonics. Was that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, oh, that sounds cool. Maybe you'd like to tell us a bit more about it on our Paranormal Peep Show. So here he is for that one. So how did the talk go, first of all, James?
Yeah, well, the talk went really well. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when it's your first one, and it's a theory that you haven't really sort of widely shared. So it was very much, let's get through it. Let's see what sort of questions we come back and see what the general response was. But I got some really great feedback, and so I now feel it's something that I'm going to try and press ahead with.
Excellent. And I know that you told me little brief bits about the talk, and from our brief discussions, I think this is an apt kind of sequel talk, because we had a guest that was also at the Birmingham UFO group back in December. And our guest last month was Kieran Woodhouse, and we were talking last month about the connections between ghosts and spirits and UFOs, and he believes that a greater level of reality, they're all connected. So yours kind of treads into that area as well, I understand.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's about trying to put a little bit of science behind why they are connected.
Okay. So we always ask this for all of our guests then, and we ask the same of Kieran. How did you become interested, in UFOs, ghosts, spirits, the paranormal? What was it that started making you go to these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, there was 3 sort of key events in my life. 2 of them were UFO related. One of them was paranormal related. So the first one was I was living in Birmingham at the time. It was a November night. So I was walking the dog, looked up into the sky, and it looked as if there was a comet going across the sky. But what happened was as it arched over, it looked to go behind something, and there was a slight sort of arch in the sky. I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. I went home and I was looking out of my window because I used to be a keen amateur astronomer, and I saw a light that was getting towards me. It was getting closer and closer until it was quite large in size, and it was literally just there in the sky hovering. And I sort of asked out. I said, well, I can't tell what you are. And it actually turned round, rotated before actually going over the house. Now, I was quite fortunate that my sister was coming home at that time, and she came running into the house and went, "Oh my goodness, have you just seen what's gone over the house?" And I went, "Yeah." So I think, and the thing is with UFO experiences, it's a case of, people have very different sort of experiences, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to sort of give any sort of provenance to it. So the second event is what was the most interesting. So 10 years later, I'm living in a completely different part of Birmingham with my partner, who's now my wife, and I get a knock on the door, and there was a gentleman and a lady, both dressed in black, and said, "We'd like to discuss your UFO sighting a number of years ago." And and this is such a bizarre thing, because nowadays there would be so many different sort of questions that you would ask, but I kind of went, "Yeah, all right then," and then came in. and even now when I retell this, it sounds almost ridiculous, because you'd be thinking, right, well, what's this all about? So I haven't actively made this sort of common knowledge. And so they came in. The gentleman was in his late 50s, quite sort of scruffy hair, a bit dishevelled. But the lady was about my height. I'm 6 foot, and she had blonde hair, sort of pulled quite back, quite fierce blue eyes. And they started asking me about the experience, and they brought out this folder, and they said, "Right, the first thing that you saw, did it look like this?" And when they say, "Did it look like this?" it wasn't as if it was a picture of something similar. It was as if they had taken the picture through my own eyes. And I looked, and I was kind of taken aback, and I looked, and I went, "Okay, then who are you guys?" And they went, "Oh, we'll come to that." And they moved on, and basically
speak English or American, like the accent.
No, it was English. It was English accent. Right. So it was
Birmingham accent, or
no. It sounded more southern, so more sort of London-esque type sort of accents. And so it came to the second one, which was obviously with regards to the to the ship itself, and they're asking some very sort of specific questions. And again, they said, "Did it look like this?" And once again, it was as if the picture had been taken through my own eyes. I mean, as in, it was actually almost framed as if you were looking out the window in the garden. And it was very, very sort of specific. And then after that, they were very keen to understand whether I'd had any paranormal experience. To which I said I'd had some things. They were asking me, had I experienced other sort of different phenomenon. And then and this was for about 20 minutes. And then at the end of it, I kind of went, "Okay, now I've answered all your questions. Are you going to tell me a little bit about yourselves?" And they said, "No, we've got what we needed." and literally walked out the door. And it has to be, to this day, one of the most surreal experiences. These two complete strangers turn up at my door. I actually let them in the house. And it's not until they leave that suddenly I go, "Why on earth did I not ask all these various questions?" So very, very bizarre thing. And so that kind of, for me, sort of validated to a certain degree that maybe what I'd seen, 10 years ago wasn't something that was so easily, wasn't so easy to explain. And then finally, the third experience was a paranormal experience. And this was about 14 years ago at my previous house. My wife was very heavily pregnant at the time. My first child, my daughter, was due at the end of January, and it was about a week before New Year. And we're in the front room, and it all goes very sort of cold around me to the extent that I can see my breath. Now, at that time, I was a member of a number of paranormal groups, so immediately I get all my gear out and start doing all the testing and stuff and taking pictures and stuff. And it was extremely focused on myself. So no matter where I went, it was cold, but around my wife, it wasn't. And then we sat down, and in the corner of this room, this small white light appeared until it got to about the size of about a 50 pence piece. So not massive, but it was a very, very brilliant light. And then suddenly it just faded out. And when it faded out, it basically zapped anything with a charge in the room. So that was mobile phones, laptops, consoles. They had all been zapped. And
by zapped, you mean drained of energy?
Yes, sorry. Yes. So basically there was no charge. Anything that had a charge in that room had gone. So it was on zero charge. Cameras, everything, zero charge. And so I got in touch with my paranormal group, and the first thing they said to me was, "Look, is your wife okay?" And I said, "Well, yeah, as far as I know." And they said, "Well, in our experience, anything that makes that much effort to come into the atmosphere potentially could be a warning. Now, it just so happens that on New Year's Eve, in the evening, my wife becomes very ill and rushed to hospital and ends up having an emergency cesarean. I mean, luckily my daughter and our wife are okay now, but it was a case of they were in hospital for a month afterwards, and it turned out it was a detached placenta. Now, so you could say, well, this is a complete, it could be a complete coincidence. But what happened was when we brought my daughter home, the first night where she was crying, we found that there was basically an orb that appeared outside the door in the bedroom, and opened up the door and waited for it. And then this orb literally just appeared in the corridor, went down the corridor to the door where the nursery was, and just waited, and then went in. And my daughter had actually turned on her side, and so we moved. So we basically repositioned her stuff. And for about 3 weeks afterwards, anytime there was any sort of unrest or anything, this orb would appear and just wait till you walk down the corridor to where the nursery was. And so these three things got me thinking, right, okay, some people, extraordinary things happen to. I'm a very, very average person, but it's a case of I've had a number of things that happen. And I'll go back to that Men in Black experience, and they were very, very keen to understand, had I had any sort of paranormal experience? And that's what started me thinking, right, well, is there some sort of intrinsic link here? Because again, I've visited a number of different sites, always trying to take a scientific view, seen a lot of things, personally experienced a lot of things, and thinking, right, well, what is the common denominator in all of this other than myself? And that's really what started me on this journey.
You mentioned your sister saying, did you see that too, the UFO?
Yes. Yeah.
Has she gone on to have further paranormal experiences in her life?
Well, yeah, she had some paranormal experiences. It tended to be more sort of minor things, really, just general sort of more sort of empathic sort of feelings. Found that things like downing, stuff like that. She found that she could be quite accurate with that. I mean, personally for me, some of those areas I'm not so sure about, but it's a case of she felt that she had an increased awareness as well, and obviously as I had as well. Then you have to take that seriously.
Go on.
No, go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to say, and so did she not receive a visit from the Men in Black?
No, not at all. Not at all. So that, and again, like I said, that was very interesting, because it was a case of was it something sort of specific to what I'd seen? And again, the thing that got me was the fact that it was literally as if you'd taken what I'd seen and printed it off, essentially, and that's what it was. And also just the fact that naturally I'm a very inquisitive person, and I was just completely disarmed. It was just such a surreal sort of almost sort of compliance to them entering the house.
So when this happened, did you mention it anywhere to anyone other than your sister?
Well, that's it. So the one place that I had mentioned it was to the Birmingham Observatory, who had basically said that it was serious to what I'd seen. And again, I was rather sort of incredulous, but as a 18-year-old also kind of put down that they'd think that might be what it was. And so again, and that's a very good question, because I was thinking to myself, right, okay, so is that general knowledge? But at the time, I'm not sure whether the Freedom of Information Act was actually working at that time, or whether there was a connection there. So that could well be how they found it. But the interesting thing was that they had contacted me directly, and so they must have physically searched for me through I guess it'd be the telephone book or that, something like that, to try and get hold of me.
I mean, this is a guess, but I would guess that maybe there is some kind of either unwritten rule or maybe secret rule within the observatory community or the astronomical community that if you get somebody claiming or saying such and such, you must contact such and such department that we're not supposed to know about. That trickles down. Why it takes 10 years.
Well, exactly. But yeah, and that's another thing. I couldn't understand, why was there such a large gap? Surely, it would be a case of, you'd expect it to be very quick. I mean, I remember after the first experience, getting all the local papers thinking, this is the middle of Birmingham. Surely somebody else is going to have seen something. And apart from my sister, there was no record of it.
So the fact that you were very compliant and didn't ask any questions reminds me of cases where people feel like they've been mind controlled during the episode of meeting the Men in Black. That leads me into the direction of either some kind of advanced technology they've got, or the fact that they might not actually be human. So a lot of people talk about when they meet Men in Black, they're kind of very shuffling. It's almost like they're trying to keep a human form, as if they want to burst out of it, but keeping it contained. Did you get that kind of feeling, or not blinking is another one as well? Did you get
well, it's a case of they were two very, very different people. So the gentleman was quite scruffy in appearance and was quite disheveled, whereas the lady was very, very pristine and was quite sort of it's sort of like suited up. So that was maybe something there. But I mean, it's one of those things that I didn't feel that I had been manipulated, but obviously it's not until they walked out, then you suddenly go, why on earth did you not just ask all the questions that any other sane person would have asked?
I mean, it's the classic thing of the mind wipe thing, the Will Smith kind of mind wipe. But in their particular case, obviously you've remembered it, so it wasn't a mind wipe. But I would say maybe something to do with not exactly mind wipe, but mind manipulation. Almost like a hypnotist. A hypnotist can convince you that you've forgotten your name, or can kind of convince you that you got your hand stuck to your forehead. And then you come out of it, and you're not there anymore. You're not within that kind of hypnotized zone. So maybe they were doing some of that.
Interesting.
It's interesting also. I mean, we always go with the expression Men in Black, and you expect two men in dark suits and hats and things to turn up in an old Cadillac or something. But it was a lady as well. I've never heard of a lady Men in Black.
I have.
Okay, and there was no, there was no hats involved. So it was literally, it was a case of, black sort of trench coats, that sort of thing, rather than the hat and Cadillac.
You think they'd mix it up a little bit, I mean, what is it with this Men in Black thing, and what is it with the old Cadillacs and the trilby hats? I don't get it.
Well, isn't it because, I mean, the things I've heard about this idea is that they sort of try to, like you say, integrate into society if they're aliens.
But fail.
they get the fact they pick the wrong case catalogue to go out in. They get like the 1957 version to dress up in, rather than 2020 or something. And hence the car's getting wrong. I mean, I've heard of cases of UFOs trying to emulate our flying machines, i.e. CraftNet, but they get the era wrong, and they pick like a World War to Spitfire or something, and they sort of, because I mean, Dave Hodgkin did this interesting talk where the Greys have this screen memories thing. So when they abduct you, you're seeing like a Teletubby or something, or your favorite cartoon character, and so you go, oh, that's nice or something, in your dreamlike state. But in fact, it's an alien Grey behind it. And he's also said about aliens dressing up literally with masks, trying to pretend they're humans as well. And so it could be like the Men in Black just don't quite get the era right. They know that we've got mechanical devices. They see a plane somehow, and they think, right, well, we'll choose that plane, not realizing it's 75 years out of date,
Was there anything unnatural about them, James, apart from the way they looked and dressed? Was there anything that made you think they're not human?
Not necessarily. I just thought that the lady was very sort of striking looking, because obviously because of her height, and she was quite sort of gaunt looking maybe. So I wouldn't necessarily have said they weren't human, but certainly she was very striking, and very noticeable the fact that she was so tall and had quite sort of striking facial sort of features. So she was quite gaunt around the cheeks, for example, and I suppose you could say maybe, I don't want to sort of add maybe that wasn't there, but maybe a slight, we'll say, angular look to the face. I don't know if that's it was certainly, you would have, if you'd seen her, you would have thought that she was quite thin.
So talking about the kind of like the vehicles and kind of like the aliens or whatever it is, not quite getting it right. Have you, or did you get any what I call circus at the same time that this was going on. I'll explain what I mean by circus. And I don't know if you know Tony Topping or listen to him or have heard his stuff, but he also talks about the circus. Okay, this is what the circus is. When I got into kind of like the paranormal and doing psychic readings, all that kind of thing, I came from a direction of love and light and fluffy clouds and rainbows and the spiritualist church direction, which is fine. As I was kind of progressing and doing a lot of meditation and doing a lot of psychic online readings just for fun of it, I was getting circus. I was getting helicopters buzzing around my house at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for days on end, again and again and again. I was getting weird phone calls at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's no one there, but there was strange noises. I was getting people flashing their headlights, either running, because I do a lot of jogging and running, either running or driving. There'll be cars flashing their headlights behind me and in front of me, trying to let me know that there's something wrong. And I'd pull over and there's absolutely nothing wrong. And there's all this, and also things to do with people narrating my life. So I'd be in situations where I'd be sat there and people were just talking about my life. And it was just the most bizarre, weird crap that goes on. And I've heard about this from other people. And Tony Topping is kind of like an alien experiencer as well. He calls it circus and pantomime, which is exactly what it is. It's just pantomime. And there's other people that talk about things like TI, targeted individuals, where you have a moment where just everything falls apart in your life, or you just get weirdness, just utter weirdness in life. Have you had any circus?
Yes. So I call it slightly different. So what I have is peaks and troughs in paranormal experience. So what I found was that when I left for uni, every single house I was in had some crazy paranormal event happen, and I mean every house, to the extent that my housemates used to joke about it. And we'd go and, they'd say, right, James, do you check on the house first? Let's see what kind of pops up. And this is carried through even to the house I'm in now, which has no sort of real sort of history to it with regards to the paranormal, but I will get peaks and troughs. So for example, and this is a very, very random thing that's happened actually in the last 2 weeks. So my daughter found a gargoyle in the garden, and she brought it into the house. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. She found a second gargoyle about 4 or 5 days later, and brought that into the house. And when that was in the house, suddenly we had all sorts of problems with all our LED lights flashing. We had things like that. We had things that had moved around the house on a number of occasions, which again, when you talk about this sort of thing, you go, what, really? And you go, no, genuinely, it's a case of things have moved around the house, the lights are going, to the extent that I put them both back into the garden again, and it calmed right down.
When you say found gargoyles, are you saying that you didn't buy them? They were literally
didn't buy them. They were in the garden. And what happened is we'd cleared the garden a couple of months previously, and it had been very overgrown. And I think they were just there from the previous owners. I mean, they're nothing special. I mean, they're quite naff sort of gargoyles. One was sort of grey and looked like a Chinese dragon. The other one was black and looked more sort of impish looking. And it was the black one that when we brought that into the house, that we had this really weird correlation with the lights going crazy and stuff. And it literally, it was very recent. I just put them both back into the garden, and it just calmed down. Now again, there could be all sorts of extenuating circumstances and coincidences, but that's the sort of drama I'm talking about. Pure randomness like that. For example, there's been a couple of times where I've been upstairs, and there's been an auditory hallucination where a woman with an American accent has just gone, hello. And it's a case of, now that's been a case of, we know the neighbours either side. Often when we've done research into auditory hallucination, it's usually in the accents that you hear, that you hear this. Very rarely do you hear a out of accent sort of auditory illusion. So that kind of was quite interesting. And again, you then look at things like, well, okay, you've got Google Home in your house. Could it have been something randomly that had that come through there? So, there's those sort of things that you've got to take into account. But I mean, my wife is sick to death of it, to be honest with you. Is that we just get these peaks and troughs no matter where it is. And what I love about my wife is that she's a lot more skeptical than I am. So what it means is, if I get quite excited, she'll say, "Right, calm down, James. No, just calm down. let's just check it." And she is my sense check. So okay, so don't get too excited now. This is what we're thinking about, and that's great. I mean, she has seen things herself, but she tends to ignore it, to be honest with you, where I tend to pick things up. And one of the things we do get a lot of is visual sort of phenomena in the form of orbs and stuff. To the extent in our previous house, the kids used to go, "Oh, look, bubble." And so so that made me feel better, because obviously when you start seeing stuff like that, the first thing you check is, right, do my eyes need to be checked? And I actually did go and get my eyes checked and stuff, just to make sure there wasn't anything, there, or, any sort of retinotory sort of issue. Was the house overly dusty, for example? Because obviously one of the big things you pick up, certainly when you're using digital cameras, is, you'll pick up all sorts of stuff from there. But again, so for me personally, it tends to be more sort of visual phenomenon. So sometimes I've swore blind that someone has walked across our landing, things like that. But when you see something, it's quite interesting. It isn't a defined image; it is an outline. It's quite strange, because I've always said that when I ever saw something or think I've seen something, my personal interpretation is that when you get heat haze on a very warm day on the road, and you get slight ripple because the molecules are basically heating up. It's like that. You almost get like a heat haze in your vision, and then you actually see something in it. And that's probably the closest I can come to try and explain if I believe I've seen something. Not necessarily saying I have seen something, but from my perspective, I believe I've seen something, and that's how it's manifested itself to me.
I'm just now connecting that back to the photograph that appears to have been taken from your perspective of this UFO, and think,
yes,
is there some little camera in your eyeball somewhere that someone's put years ago, and that's causing the problems now? Like, you're trying to sort of think about how on earth did they get that image that was from your perspective and present it to you? Don't know.
Well, what I believe is, obviously you've got a number of you've got billions and trillions of electrical impulses that are going through your brain at any one time. And I think that the brain is something that we still know so little about. And I believe that it is possible using sort of electrical equipment to interact with those electrical pulses. And it's in many ways, it's like reading a hard drive. And I think that there is technology there which I believe can actually recall imagery, or we're on that sort of line of things. Because I think we're now in the age of quantum computing. We're getting a point where we will be able to decode the electrical impulses of the brain, and when we do that, we will then better understand what consciousness is and what it is to be a human.
What I find really interesting about these kind of things is that, and I don't know which creates which, but people who see things like the paranormal, and especially UFOs, then go on to get kind of like other weird paranormal experiences, or circus, or Men in Black, and stuff like that. And exactly the same thing happened with Tony Topping. His circus started when he did a Freedom of Information Act request on the UN to find out everything he could about UFOs. He did that, and he didn't really have a particular interest up until that point, and didn't really have any experiences up until that point. But something sparked his interest, and then all this stuff happened. With me personally, it was kind of going to the spiritualist churches, doing the meditations, doing psychic stuff. And I was also seeing orbs, so I know exactly what you mean about the orbs and the little. I followed a snowflake. I call it a snowflake. I followed a snowflake up the stairs once where I live, and it went up and then off, right up into the ceiling, up into the loft, and disappeared. And it was you could see it. I could almost touch it. It was right in front of me. And that was when I was getting my circus. That was when I was getting the really freaky stuff happening. It's so fun.
That's really interesting. Now, what you're talking about there is something that I talk about attunement and part of Universal sort of Harmonix, because essentially what we're saying is that everything has a frequency. So it doesn't matter whether you are, whether you're looking at light, whether you're looking at gamma rays, whether you're looking at microwaves, radar, they all operate at a certain frequency. And so does the brain as well. And the brain basically operates at a frequency. And so what you have is within the sort of 0 to 20 hertz range, you have your delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma delta waves. And each of these are associated with a particular frequency. So, for example, one of the most interesting frequencies is between 15 and 24 hertz. That's the beta 2 brainwave. That is assigned to active consciousness and sleeplessness. And I believe that it is at that sort of frequency of the brain that basically you use that to attune to different frequencies. You're collecting sort of information and connecting with that. And I believe that partially is what often triggers the sort of paranormal or UFO experience.
Interesting. Another thing I'll ask you, James, actually,
Yes.
have you noticed, and I don't know if you correlate this, but I do, have you noticed severe health problems in terms of insomnia, sleeplessness, stomach issues, joint issues when there are solar flares and solar eruptions? Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah, actually, yes, because I'm actually struggling at the minute with insomnia, and actually, what was very interesting was coming up to the first talk I did at the Birmingham UFO group. Obviously, part of this could be nerves, but I don't usually suffer with insomnia, and I got hit because there was just so many different thoughts that was going through my mind and research, and again, for the last 3 or 4 days prior to this one, I've had that same sort of thing where suddenly it's a case of, it's almost like a mania where you've got that many sort of thoughts and processes that you're going through, and you're trying to work out what it is, what's the most important thing that you want to discuss. And and with this particular talk, the one sort of thing that's triggered this is my sort of understanding of what consciousness is. And now consciousness is obviously, it's one of the age-old conversations. So what is it that makes us conscious? Why is it that we have this consciousness, whereas, when you take our bodies into their component parts, they are literally robots. What makes us different from that robot? And I started listening to an Australian philosopher called David Chalmers. Now, he's done a number of TED Talks and things about what is consciousness. And he came up with a really, really sort of fantastic suggestion. And is that, as we try and explain consciousness, is no different for when, James Clerk Maxwell was talking about electromagnetism. He was trying to explain something that he couldn't explain as part of the key fundamental forces of nature. So, whether we're talking about it being, strong gravity, low gravity, all of that sort of stuff, weak nuclear, electromagnetism, all of those things didn't necessarily explain what it was that he was experiencing. So what if consciousness is actually something that we should regard as a fundamental new force? Now, more importantly, there was some work done by the neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. And what he's done is he's created a mathematical theory of something called phi. Now, where I find this really interesting is that he talks about consciousness in the terms of information integration. So what he says is that the human brain has a high amount of information integration, so that it has a very high sort of phi score. But as you break things down, down to sort of like lower animals and stuff, but then even going down to things like electrons, there is a fundamental not consciousness, not in the way of I think therefore I am, but there is a consciousness that is below 1 but above 0. And he believes that if we go down this route, that we may be able to look at consciousness as potentially a fundamental new force. And this, for me, suddenly when I heard this, well, this is this, because I only came across this about a month ago, and I'd done my presentation separate to this, and there's actually a fair bit of sort of crossover, because I believe that what we have is you have a source frequency, and the viewer, that is us, what we do is we basically tune into that using our conscious mind. And what happens is that when you've tuned in to a particular frequency, then this creates a resonance, which then causes a transfer of information. And this is all about how information is transferred, because the body essentially is a giant antennae. If you think about it, mechanically, it is designed through the five senses to collect as much information as possible. And the brain, that is the sort of the engine that does the decoding, but it is the conscious mind that then actually experiences all of that information that you're coming in. And this is something that I think that we, especially when we start looking at quantum mechanics and quantum computing, where we're very close to a point where we are going to be able to attach electrodes to the human brain and actually capture electrical impulses. Elon Musk, about 3 days ago, just went on about the fact that this is something he is actually doing, but he's using it to look at how it can cure, various things. Parkinson's is often one that springs to mind. But it's a case of, with quantum computing, I don't think people realise how big a deal quantum computing is going to be, because it is going to give us the opportunity to process information in a way that we've never been able to do. And that processing power is what potentially is going to unlock a lot of this sort of phenomenon, not only about the human mind, but also about our place in the universe, looking at things like how multi-dimensions work. And again, a lot of these sort of basic principles are what I've tried to use to underpin the Universal Harmonics. And essentially, it is a source, it is ourselves, our conscious mind tunes into it, there's transfer of information. So a great example of this would be paranormal experience. You go into a building and you see something, and it's classified as a replay event, because at the same time something will happen, something will whether something moves, something like that, that basically that is going to happen. And that's because it's like you're essentially playing a tape recorder. It's a case of you are the engine that's connecting to that electromagnetic force, which then plays that event. And this works for all sorts of different experience. I've broken paranormal experience into sort of 5 groups. I look at UFOs, because again, with ufology, the keen sort of focus now is about how the conscious mind is used to connect with UFOs. Also, again, depending on which conspiracy theory you believe, there's a certain dampening of that as well. And again, it's just I feel very excited, because it's a case of, it's like I've kind of known this, and I've started to write it down, and suddenly I'm finding all this research that is kind of, again, you have to be very careful, because obviously you will always read into something what you want to, but it's a case of, I just find very interesting. The moment I'm in at the minute is all these thoughts that I've had and I've finally written down, and then literally in the space of weeks, I'm just getting additional information that's coming in. And and again, very keen to point out, this is a hypothesis. I'm not a physicist. I have an amateur interest in it, and again, I can talk a little bit about some of the backgrounds there. But I'm just very keen to have this conversation. As far as I'm concerned, I'm discussing something that I just want to share with people. And it's a case of, if there are people with a better understanding that say, James, I don't think you're right in this, I warmly welcome it, because that's what you do in science. You create a hypothesis for it to be tested.
Does that tie up anything to do with creating your own reality in any shape or form?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a really good sort of analogy. So Steve Weinberg was an American theoretical physicist, and he actually won the Nobel laureate in physics. And what he said is that you're in a room with a number of radio frequencies. However, you're only actually tuned into one of them. You coexist with all these multiple radio frequencies, but you're only attuned to one. And those other frequencies are other universes. And so if you go back to the old Schrodinger's cat sort of principle, where, is the cat alive, is the cat dead? Until you actually observe it, the thought is that it can actually be one or two sort of states. But actually, what you're doing is, in observing, you are tuning into that particular universe. And it is the conscious mind that has the ability to transverse different universes, because you are the observer, and as the observer, you create the reality.
I'm kind of wondering if UFOs and even some spirits as well, and what people call demons and angels, if they're
Yes.
somehow conscious programs, or even kind of like almost software programs that are somehow hacking into this reality in a bit in a way. The Matrix, the Oracle, was talking
Yes.
about programs hacking programs, and I love the Matrix films, and it's the dialogue that I like the most about the Matrix films.
Yeah.
Programs hacking programs is a very interesting concept. What if these UFO stroke aliens stroke demons stroke angels stroke ghosts and spirits, entities, poltergeists, are coming from whatever dimension, God knows what dimension, and somehow, for whatever reason, because we don't quite know what the reason is, hacking into this reality for some unknown purpose.
Yeah, so so this is something I've talked about, and now there are a number of different theories about this sort of multiverse. I mean, a lot of it, a lot of people will think about it in the terms of Marvel sort of universe, but it's a case of dependent on which theory you're looking at. So if it's the Randall-Sundrum model, that you believe that there are 5 dimensions. If it's string theory, you believe there's 10 dimensions. If the superstring theory, you believe it's 10 dimensions. If it's M theory, you think it's 11. And then if it's the Bose string theory, then you believe there's 27 dimensions. Now, when I did some work of this, again, very keen to point out, I'm an amateur fan. I'm not a physicist. I was looking at how is it that we have these different sort of phenomenon? How is it that we access it? And through the research that I did, and it's something that is prevalent across all those different theories, is that the 4th dimension is associated with space and time. And so that's the one thing that's agreed. And in fact, the Large Hadron Collider has proven essentially that we have the fourth dimension, and we know that it's there. So we've got that sort of thing that we talk about. And if we were to look at ourselves in the 4th dimension, what we would actually do is we would essentially see like a giant slinky of ourselves, where we would have the embryonic version of ourselves at the front, and us almost at the grave at the very end. And it's a case of, from the 4th dimension, it's a case of what you're doing is you are no longer looking at being led by coordinates. It's a case of you are looking at yourself through space and time. So couple of very specific examples. So in a 2-dimensional world, you have a desk, okay? And what you do is you have some paper, and you put some paper on that desk until you've filled up the whole desk. In the third dimension, what you would do is you would stack that paper up, and so you could basically fill in more paper on the desk. That's your 3rd dimension. In the 4th dimension, you put it in the desk, because the point is that coordinates don't matter anymore. And one of the key sort of points about the 4th dimension is the fact that you are able to teleport. And in fact, it was I think it was it Ted Grassi who said that Monsters Inc., the idea of the door opening up, they got it right. And I find that very interesting. And if you think about how the 4th dimension works, it actually makes a lot of sense with a lot of UFO sort of tropes and abduction experience. Because if you think about it logically, so a beam comes through the window and pulls you out through the window up into the spaceship. Now, hang on, if you were just looking at something being 3rd dimension, well, you'd bash into the window, wouldn't you? It's a case of what is it that allows you to be able to do that, and it's a case of once you remove that reliance on those sort of locations, and certainly a lot of things make sense. I certainly believe that with a lot of paranormal experience, especially when you're seeing a spirit, it's a case of I don't actually believe you are seeing a spirit. What I believe you're seeing is actually a 4th dimensional manifestation inside a 3D world. It's very much like the fact that I know that we're 3D, but the minute I'm looking at you via a screen, and I can only see you within the confines of that 2D screen, but we know we're 3D. And it's very much about the fact that we can't access the sort of 4th dimension, mainly through the source of light. And one of the theories is that actually light as a force hasn't actually got the ability to transverse a different universe. So you can't actually physically see it because light hasn't got the ability to go across there. So it's about basically how is it that you then sort of connect. So what I simply believe is that we have different universes. Again, if you look at M theory, it says that there are 11 dimensions, of which there are four main dimensions and then 7 smaller dimensions that are all sort of offset. But within those dimensions, I think the maths is, I think it's 10 to the power of 500 universes mathematically, they said could exist within that construct. And they believe that the Big Bang, and some of the theories changed, is that the Big Bang has changed. And it wasn't that there was just suddenly this source and it just kind of exploded. What M theory is suggesting, that actually that what it is that 2 universes have collided, and that's what's actually caused the Big Bang sort of event, and it's like the creation of another universe. And so the thought about there being parallel universes, I think, is correct. I think that the challenge is how do you interact with it? So for example, going back to the 4th dimension, space and time, what you do is you would potentially want to go through the 4th dimension and visit a version of yourself where maybe you've invented something amazing and you go, right, brilliant, I'm going to nick that and take that back. But you can't do that because it's a case of you can't actually pinpoint which version of yourself in that time is it. So to be able to do that, you would then have to go through either the 5th or the 6th dimension, which would then allow you to go through different versions of yourself, different instances of yourself, because that is how you are represented in a different universe. So I believe essentially that that we are strands of energy across across multiple universes, and that for me is backed up by string theory that says when you get down to the smallest elements, that essentially it is a filament of energy. It's that's all. Now, there's a couple of challenges with this, in that whenever you try and get something, when you try and view something that small, you have something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, where you get a jitter, and it means that you can't actually look at things at a quantum level. So as far as they can see, that's the smallest thing. But the key thing is a vibration of frequency. I believe this theory of frequency is something that basically can be used. We don't properly understand it. I think the person that probably got close to it was Nikola Tesla. Now, he said the day science begins to study non-physical phenomenon, it will make more progress in 1 decade than the previous centuries in its existence. And I look at a lot of stuff that he did and how his experience with frequency and how his experience with resonance, that I believe that this is an area that can link it all. And again, I appreciate I'm talking a lot. I'll just give you one more quick analogy. So imagine that you've got 2 tuning forks on a block with a ping pong ball attached to the second tuning fork. Now, you know that basically if you hit the first tuning fork, what will happen is the waves will go through the block, and it will then actually cause the second tuning fork to ring, and the ping pong ball will be buffered around through the resonance. So what you've got basically 2 different objects that have resonated at the right frequency. And then what's happened is that transfer of information, and again, using that term, linking again back to consciousness, you have that transfer of information, and you see the effects of it. And that transfer of information is the ball that is moving around.
And the reason I brought, talking of balls, the reason I brought up the sun and the electromagnetic energy is that I've noticed with myself and with, let's just say, spiritual and psychic inclined people that I know, it's almost guaranteed whenever there's a solar flare, there's going to be joint flare-ups, there's going to be, for some reason, intestinal, gastro issues. My stomach has like a somersault kind of thing, and insomnia and lack of sleep, and this happens every time I get like a really bad stomach. I go to Google, I put in solar flare activity, and sure enough, something will pop up, a mass ejection of solar electromagnetic.
Well, it's very interesting that you've said that, because there's 2 other things that are directly linked to this. So first of all, there's something called the Schumann resonance. I don't know if this is something you've heard of. So the Schumann resonance is something that, and again, I find it very interesting that for ages, sort of new wave and sort of new age thoughts have talked about Gaia, and the fact that there is this sort of almost human heartbeat. And actually, it turns out that Schumann, basically in the 50s, what he found was that around the Earth at any moment in time, there are hundreds of different thunderstorms and lightning events that are going on. What happens is that these builds up a resonance over time and create waves that are going around the world. Now, it just so happens that the frequency of this is around 8 hertz, which correlates with a lot of human sort of activity as well. And so actually what we're finding is that through the Schumann resonance is that this can have an effect on all sort of biological beings. And also NASA has just recently discovered that, and I use the word advisedly, that there is electromagnetic portals between the Earth to the Sun, where basically electromagnetic, it is like literally electromagnetic waves are transferred at a far higher rate. And this is happening apparently tens of times a day. And what we're showing, and what it's showing is that certain parts around the world, in certain places, there is a higher concentration of electromagnetic energy. Now, obviously, one of the classic examples of this is the Great Pyramids. But the interesting thing about the pyramids is that now again, I would have to refer to my notes on this, but I believe that when you take the pyramids to the scale of 1 to I think it's 42,000, I can't remember the exact number, it gives the exact dimensions of the Earth. And also is that the placing of the pyramids takes into account the Earth's wobble in its orbit, which is incredible because so if you were just looking at going from a pure electromagnetic perspective, the pyramids wouldn't be where they are. But the fact that it's been taken into account, the actual wobble, that they are where they are, and this appears to be sort of replicated in places like Stonehenge, and obviously in the UK, going back to the New Age, talk about there being a lot of sort of electrical energy. And again, a lot of this I never used to give credence to because obviously, there are all sorts of different belief systems that will actively take those words up as proof. But actually, it turns out that there really are there really is a sort of electromagnetic ground system. And again, what Tesla wanted to do was he wanted to create a number of pylons around the globe, and what that would do is that would transfer electricity wirelessly. Now, this is something almost 100 years ago that we're now only revisiting, but this is something he had pretty much nailed that amount of time ago. So I find Tesla someone to be incredibly interesting. I believe that he had a lot of foresight that we're only now kind of catching up with.
I think on that note, it's time for us to take a break, but it's all getting very deep and interesting. It's almost like I ponder and wonder to think that what would Tesla think of the world today with the internet and satellites and all sorts of things, He could do a lot of potentially even better stuff if he was around today, but that's obviously the job of the psychic.
Let's hope he reincarnates.
Sorry, Andy, what was that?
Let's hope he reincarnates.
That's right, yeah. Right, okay, so just to recap, we're on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and our guest is James Brodie, and we're talking Universal Harmonics, and it's getting very deep, so we're going to obviously have to take a breather now while we condense all this stuff. So join us in a minute where we'll have part 2 and further insights into string theory, UFOs, Men in Black, and even Tesla.
Hi, this is Ben Emlyn-Jones, regular guest on the Paranormal Peep Show. Tune in to Neil and Andy for all your paranormal updates and insights, and quirky fun chat with some seriously spooky topics.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and here we are chatting again to James Brodie about the Universal, I would say Matrix, but you would call it Universal
Harmonics.
But
I'll call it
Harmonics.
Matrix.
Matrix. I think the Matrix has done a lot of things for favours, or maybe not favours for people, depending on where you're coming.
Have you seen the 4th one, Neil? What did you think?
That's just come out, hasn't it?
Yeah. Have you seen it, James?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I was slightly disappointed. I was expecting more, but
yeah, I think the problem is a lot of what made the Matrix special isn't special anymore, and it self-references itself.
I think technology's caught up with that, hasn't it? Or the world has caught up with the Matrix or something. We're all kind of clued up on it.
It kind of feels like the fourth film, it didn't really offer anything that we didn't already know.
Exactly.
Like the first groundbreaking Matrix was in 1999, I think it was, and that was just mind blowing. But the latest one was like, okay, it's 23 years since that. It's just like, give us something more, give us something a bit more concrete. But just glossing over the same old stuff, really.
Well, that's
all the fights with bullets and things like that, I suppose.
Well, and I always thought, really, the three Matrix films really is just a rehashing of Clash of the Titans.
Oh, okay.
Think about it.
I'm going to have to watch Clash of the Titans again because I've not seen it for donkeys years.
Interesting. I never thought of it like that, but I saw the first Clash of the Titans films, which is that Ray Harryhausen version.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw the remake with the guy out of whatever the film was.
Yeah.
The effects were good, but they missed out the little owl in the.
Exactly. Well, he was in it briefly. He was. He had a small cameo, but that was.
They made a reference to it. They said, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, we don't talk about that," or something like. They almost said, "I was too embarrassing to have in this film, so we're just going to nod it,"
Going forwards, where we're talking about kind of reality and perceptions and kind of like bleeding realities crossing into each other. I briefly heard, because I think James and Neil, you were having a discussion. I briefly heard, James, that you were working for the Ministry of Defence, and obviously we can't go into that because of national security issues and stuff. But
we can.
I think I would. I think I would be fairly. I think I'd be fairly correct in saying it wouldn't be very cost effective to pay somebody to hover a helicopter outside someone's house for hours on end, day after day after day, because it's something like £1,500 per half hour or something to fly a helicopter. So my thinking is, when I was doing all the meditation, I had all the weird stuff and all the circus happening at this bloody helicopter, and it was there. At first, I thought drugs raid or missing person. Okay, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're thinking drugs raid, missing person. Okay, then it happened again. Then the day after. Then the day after. And logically, that can't be a drugs raid. They wouldn't fly a helicopter day after day after day. It wouldn't be a missing person, for 5 days in a row, surely. And what would be the point of me? I'm just meditating. I'm just doing psychic readings. What is the bloody point of doing it? I'm thinking, was it really a human helicopter? Or was it some kind of, and you've heard of this, Neil, before, you've heard of like the UFOs sometimes cloaking themselves or morphing themselves into what we would perceive as human technology when they're not actually human technology.
It does draw attention to the UFO. If it is in fact a UFO, cloaking itself, it's actually cloaking itself in the most noisiest fashion possible.
But I was going to say, maybe, do you know what? Maybe that's the point, and it wanted me to go outside and look at it, because I didn't. I was just annoyed when this was happening. This was I'm a bit of a night owl, so I'm up at the wee hours of the morning, and I was watching TV, and I was just annoyed by this. It was just like, oh, for God's sake, just hurry up, do what you want to do, and pay off, kind of thing. And then it happened again and again and again. I just kind of like blanked it out. I just thought, I'm not going to pay any heedance whatsoever. But what if the whole point of this thing was wanting me, hey Andy, come out and come and investigate, and we'll show you what we really look like. But I didn't do it. They kind of failed if that was the objective. Yeah,
well, there's an interesting train of thought about UFOs, in that, what if it's not actually the aliens that are the sort of intelligent life? What happens if it's actually the ships that is the intelligent life, and actually they're interacting with us through avatars? So an avatar doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of a human being. It could potentially be a object that a person connects with, and that could be a sort of trying to create a link. So it's just one of those random thoughts that I have at 2 o'clock in the morning. So because it's one of those things, it's that we're all very keen to go, oh, look, here's an alien. This is what we think our interpretation of the alien is. If they're multidimensional, or they're traveling vast distances, then it might not be in the format that we think.
Have you
Yes.
heard of Simon Parkes, James?
No, I haven't.
So he's quite an interesting guy. He claims to have. We've had him on the show actually. He claims to have alien kind of interactions and things to do with UFOs and stuff. And he talks about kind of AI sentient ships. Exactly what you were talking about. UFOs that've got their own artificial intelligence. They're kind of sentient in a way, but they haven't got a soul as such. They're not like a soul as in terms of like a human soul or an animal soul, but that you could still have a conversation. It would be quite an intelligent and interesting and engaging, and it would probably pass the Turing test.
Yes.
And maybe you're exactly right. Maybe and this, you know what, this goes back to the people seeing these Cadillacs, these black Cadillacs, and people dressed, out of period and stuff in terms of Men in Black and that kind of thing. Maybe these AI beings or entities or software programs are picking what they think is kind of like human culture and getting it wrong without realizing that maybe they haven't got the soul to realize what we would perceive as in date or out of date, or in fashion or out of fashion, or what's acceptable or not acceptable. Because Neil, you said a helicopter makes a hell of a lot of noise. Yes, it does. So if you're a being that wants attention, make a hell of a lot of noise, but it hasn't got the perception that, do you know what, humans would find that really bloody irritating for a helicopter to be buzzing around at 2 o'clock in the morning.
That's it. And again, the whole sort of AI theory, I'm very much on board with, because when there's been a lot of research and you've tried to model what first contact would look like, the classic thing is that we discover a signal, and it's not actually the signal itself that's interesting, it's decoding it and where does it point to. And you're essentially jumping 4 or 5 points until you actually get to the actual contact point. And it's a case of, you kind of led down a certain journey to work out your sort of intelligence. But the likelihood is, with a lot of signals, is that it's more likely going to come from a machine to be unless you are able to bend space and time. If you are stuck within the if our closest neighbours are actually 3-dimensional, but actually, a lot more technologically advanced, but it could be that they're more likely to have sent out some form of AI to try and map or investigate what's out there. I mean, personally, I believe that the days of the big ships, that's going to go away. And where we're going to get our real sort of expansion is when you're going to send a ship out that is going to have multiple drones, very, very tiny machines that can travel vast distances, but have got the sort of the technology to back them up and to carry on transmitting. And I believe that's where we're ultimately our sort of journey out into the cosmos is going to be. It's not going to be someone getting on a spaceship. It's going to be sending out loads of drones and probes everywhere.
Yeah, exactly that.
Do you think that, I mean, there seems to be many sort of thoughts about the origins of universes and also, UFOs, not universes, the origins of UFOs, but also maybe what ghosts and spirits are. Firstly, then, do you think that UFOs, as we classically think of them, are they from other planets, somehow breaking the light barrier and speeding through space physically, or are they something else?
So I believe that you've got a number of different types of aliens. So I think that we have aliens that operate within the third dimension, and it's a case of they may have traveled incredible distances and taken hundreds of thousands of years to reach us, and it might be the equivalent of something like a colony ship or something like that, and then that's used to make a connection. But I think the likelihood is that you may have a third dimensional alien that has been able to bend space and time, because we're not too far away from being able to do that ourselves. It's a case of really what you're trying to do at the minute is you're trying to use gravity to basically punch a hole in space-time to be able to bend space-time through a dimension. And this is quite difficult to get your head around, because it's essentially what you're doing is rather than trying to travel from point A to point B, taking this amount of distance, what you're actually doing is you're basically folding the coordinates between there so that actually they're closer together. And that's basically that's the classic sort of warp drive sort of technology, that side of things. So you've got basically aliens that may have taken a long time. There might have aliens that have got the sufficient technology to be able to bend space and time. Or it might truly be a multi-dimensional being that is just able to hyperspace from one place to the next. And I think that a lot of the experience that we have would tend to suggest it's actually that. And I think it's far more likely that we have, just because if we believe current physics that you can't go faster than the speed of light, then how do you do it? How do you actually travel those sort of distances? I mean, it's a case of there's still no guarantee that if you use the whole sort of black hole approach where you have a wormhole going through, whether you'd even survive that. And so the likelihood is to be able to sort of bend space and time, or at least put a big enough dent in it to lessen the distances. That's probably most likelihood. Or the other alternative is, of course, is that actually it is future humans that have come back. And again, if you believe the multiverse, you believe in the fourth dimension. Again, talking about being able to go and visit your sort of timeline, but it's a case of maybe the timeline isn't of your physical body; it's potentially the timeline of your consciousness, and that gives you basically a far bigger scope to travel backs and forwards. Again, there's TV shows like Travelers, which kind of follows that principle as well. Or it could just equally be, I've heard very plausible accounts that actually there's people here already, and actually a lot of what we're seeing is simply something that's actually in our neighbourhoods. Now, I remember, just very briefly, I remember 20 years ago going to a big UFO conference, and one of the talkers there was talking about the fact that there had been a unprecedented cooperation between Russia and the US in the Antarctic, because both of them had ships go mysteriously missing. And so they had massive joint, in inverted commas, exercise. Now, I actually looked this up in the newspapers, and it did actually happen. And of course, now we're hearing that the Antarctica is potentially a hotspot. If you think that 2 or 3 years ago, the talk about underwater aliens, that was you what? It's a case of what we're talking about Stingray here. That sort of thing. But actually now, there is some very credible talk about the fact that we may actually have aliens underwater, and considering how much of our Earth is water, now is that not more plausible?
Also, why were all these celebrities and like even the Pope, I think, visiting Antarctica? Do you remember that a few years ago?
Yeah.
Well, we were never told why. Nobody ever said.
Hide dead choir boys.
No, but it was more than that. It was John Kerry. It was allegedly Clinton. The Pope. It was all these people, and there's also an exclusion zone around Antarctica as well. You can't actually go onto it without special permission.
Actually, it's not quite true. My brother has been down to Antarctica on holiday. You can actually pay companies to take you down there. You have to go through all South America, right to the tip. He flew from plane to plane through the various countries of South America, and then basically you charter a boat. There's taking lots of other people as well. And he sent me videos of icebergs and things like that. And he jumped onto the ice mantle of the South Arctic, whatever. And they're all walking around there looking at the wildlife. I don't know what it is, polar bears or seals. I don't know what they got down there. And cracks started to break in the ice. And they said, you got to get back. And so they literally run across it, and they have to jump over the cracks to get back to the boat. Otherwise, they're floating off. Pretty scary stuff.
Yeah,
but I think some parts are excluded.
There are because Antarctica is absolutely massive, and Antarctica itself is like the whole of the size of North America and Mexico, the whole sort of mantle.
I'm not 100% certain, but my guess is that I'm just wondering if because you're actually under the South Pole, that the navigational instruments don't work so well with magnetic north and earth and stuff like that, and I know there's an exclusion zone, and it could be that either it's poor weather, so your navigation stuff's not maybe working so well, so they just say don't fly in that zone.
Have you got the same exclusion zone in the North Pole for the same reason?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's because the Eskimos live there. You're not allowed to fly there for that because it's air land, and part of the Christmas lives there, so that's why. That's
Lapland, isn't it? Or is that Peter Stringfellow?
Now, the thing about the spaceships coming through space, super light speed or whatever, trans warp speed.
Yeah.
I always think, well, hang on, are they going to crash into planets, asteroids, meteorites, comets on the way from, Alpha Centauri or wherever they're coming from? That's one thing, unless they've probably got some sort of technology that deflector shields or something, if they are doing it that. But from what I understand, a lot of these sort of flying saucers that people see, they have not made that journey from wherever. They are made here on the Earth, not by humans, but by them. Because they come in bigger ships from somewhere. And it's what they call their scout craft. So it's in a sense like an analogy is that you got an American or British aircraft carrier, and it goes out to the Gulf, and then it takes off, Harriers or Tomcats locally. And so the people that live out in the Gulf thinking, oh my God, that plane's flown all the way from the United States. No, it hasn't. It's actually come on a bigger ship, and just off 5 miles out off the coast. So they're like 3 or 4 manned, whatever man-sized craft, alien-sized craft, and they're flying for these little jaunts around the Earth. And you say they have been here a long time. There seems to be many sightings that go back into the 1800s at least. The 1947 Kenneth Arnold thing was just what put it on the front page of that.
Absolutely,
But the way obviously communication was a bit better in 1947 than it was in the 1800s. So there's little pockets of John Keel, for instance, did newspaper clippings of UFO reports all from around the United States, and he went right back and found things from they call them phantom airships and things like that. And people were sighting strange things back then in the 1800s. And they spoke to these people. They landed and spoke to them. And there's even one, the Aurora crash or something. Supposedly this crash in 1897, I think it was, where it crashed in Texas, Aurora, Texas, and hit the water tower or something. And they buried the alien underground somewhere there. Now, have you heard of the thing called apports?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Now, this is Andy. You know this, Andy, being spiritualist background. I'd be surprised if you didn't, but certainly in the spiritualist literature, seances and things like that, when you've had like a spirit guide, they will sometimes help manifest in a seance. And we're talking a seance in a room here, not a demonstration of mental mediumship.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
This would be a physical seance. They will have a spirit guide who might be channeled through the medium, or you might hear his voice directly in a trumpet or something like that, or a cone, and they'll say, we'll try and bring you some stuff through. And what they do is they generally will manifest, and they usually fall from the ceiling for some bizarre reason. It could be coins from the past.
No, that's really interesting, because you're saying coins. So I've experienced that firsthand.
Really?
The second house I was in at university, again, we had 2 things happen. The first thing was there used to be a noise of posters being torn off the wall, and when we checked around the house, they were always there wasn't anything done. And then I was downstairs, and I was on the computer, and a 1p piece materialised in front of me midair and drop on the keyboard. I ignored it, and then about a minute later, another penny dropped.
The penny dropped.
Well, this is exactly it. This is exactly it. The penny dropped, and I just went, "What? What do you want? You got my attention. What do you want?" And the room went cold, and then it then just moved on. So I get that first-hand experience of that.
Interesting.
There's actually in Welling Garden City, there's a spiritualist church there, and they've got an apport cupboard. They've got literally, and it's really fascinating. It's kind of like, I want to believe it, and they seem to really believe it. But there's all these objects. Some of them look like kind of shoes from the Mayan period. Some of these things look like they should be in the British Museum. Really, they're just really old artifacts that it's just so bizarre. And they claim they've done these kind of like seances or these apport
it's funny, most places you have a lost property cupboard. Only in the spiritualist church could you get the apport cupboard,
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about spiritual church, because I've tried to do a lot of research in paranormal, and part of that was actually joining a couple of spiritual churches to try and understand, what people's thoughts were, how it brought people together. And in many ways, it kind of fits into, again, just talking about Universal Harmonics again, just for a minute, because again, we're talking about a source frequency that you're trying to attune with, and your consciousness is the attunement. But another key thing to take into account is amplification. And amplification comes in that if you have people around you, that essentially you are able to use that energy to build up your own sort of resonance. And having been with a couple of different spiritualist churches, and also on the UFO side, when you've done things like, you know what CE5 is, yeah, when you do this sort of attunement, trying to make contact, we've found that with larger groups, it is that you do seem to get better responses. And I think that the amplification is a real sort of key point here, which links both paranormal and a UFO perspective, because it's a case of the attunement is basically building up the energy. So it's like you're charging your batteries to be able to then play the information, and you get that transfer of information. And it comes in either the forms of, yes, you have other people around you, or the other major amplification is the Schumann resonance, because again, you've got that direct link of frequency of around that sort of 8 hertz frequency that can be that you are naturally attuned to. And it's, this is science fact, that's basically the Schumann resonance does affect people and can influence people. And it's like, when I've done a number of paranormal investigations and I've gone to people's houses, one of the first things I've done is always go and check, right, where are all the power sources, these sort of things, because these can create EMF fields, which can then actually interfere with people and can make them see things. In fact, there's something called the ghost frequency, and the ghost frequency is quite an interesting one, because it was this guy called I think it was Vic. Yeah, that was it, Vic Tandy. And what happened was, he was working in a laboratory, and one night he thought he saw something from the corner of his eye, and a couple of things moved around his office, and this went on for about 4 or 5 days, and he became convinced that his laboratory was haunted. But then he kind of put his fear to one side and was doing some research. And one day, he was a keen fencer. He had a fence. He had his sword, and it was vibrating at the desk. And he looked at it, thought, "Oh, that looks like a sound wave." And it turned out that about 2 weeks beforehand, the laboratory had a new fan fitted, a new extraction fan, and it was actually vibrating at a frequency of 18.98 hertz. Now, if you remember at the beginning of our conversation, I said 20 hertz is that key sort of zone where you start to basically get that connection. Well, it's believed that what he discovered accidentally is something that they now call the ghost frequency. And I've actually experimented with it, where it's a low frequency noise. You kind of attune with it. And the question is it actually tricking you into thinking something, because it's very close to the level that your eyes vibrate at? So is it a case of it actually causing a hallucination, or is it a genuine sort of frequency that you're resonating with, which at some level is then allowing you to be able to connect to different dimensions, or to different energies that are in that immediate environment?
So get back to the apples then,
yes.
The fact that the spirit world, allegedly, whoever they are, the spirit world, afterlife, for a point of reference, are able to take something from this world, our world. I mean, I think of a particular thing where they took something like out of a tomb in Egypt, and they said, "We're not stealing." The spirit guide said, "We're not stealing it. It's just we're taking something that's not being used anymore, basically, because the owner's long gone." And they took something from a grave or a tomb, Egyptian scarab beetle or something like that. I don't know what it was now. I can't remember. And they manifested it in a seance room in England somewhere, and it sort of just dropped from the ceiling. And then many years ago, a friend of mine told me about this particularly haunted house that he was friends with a guy that lived there as a kid, and he said that there was a particular room that everyone wasn't to go in. They had a cross put on the door. And it was empty of things, nothing, no furniture, nothing in there, absolutely empty room. And they were told not to go in there because weird stuff had happened there. But him and his friend had gone in there as kids, and they were playing with a tennis ball, hitting it on the floor because it would bounce on the hard floor because it had no cover, and it'd go up like that, and they were doing it, boom, boom, and they bounced it like a third or fourth time, bounced it on the floor, went up, and just vanished, and it didn't come back. And then maybe 5 minutes later, it suddenly dropped out the ceiling, and they picked it up, and it was wet, really wet. So just some examples there. So I'm wondering if like UFOs are somehow using the same kind of principles as what spirit guides are doing, light apples to go from wherever they come from through here. They're transporting, and okay, our apples have to drop through a ceiling, but that's only because we're in a house. But maybe literally pennies from heaven, they would drop from the sky. I don't know why. That happened
with the Enfield poltergeist case, Neil. Do you remember?
Possibly. Yeah.
I forgot what it was. There was an object that went from the top of the where the girl's bedroom was down through the ceiling and to the people down below.
Yeah. You see now it's quite interesting. So let's have a look. Just think about timeline wise. So about four houses ago, I was with my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I was sharing a house with an old friend from school, and we got a house on the other side of Birmingham, and never have I had a house that has been so unbelievably active, and it actually got to the stage that so I've got my little website, which is paranoia.co.uk, and I had it set up then, and what I started to do was to take pictures of stuff of just stuff that was happening. So regularly, the orbs. I had some really great orb photos. One of the strange things we had was, I don't know if you remember, about 10, 11 years ago, it might have been, no, actually it was longer than that now. We had a mate, it would have been, because it was before my daughter was born, so actually it was about 16, 17 years ago, we had a earthquake that was 5 on the Richter scale, and it was actually centred in Dudley.
Oh, was this where the chimney fell down or something?
Yeah. Well, what happened about an hour before that earthquake happened, me and the wife, we were basically in our room just reading, and probably one of the largest orbs I've ever seen appeared in the middle of the room and just floated there for about 5-6 seconds before going out of the window. And I said, I said to my wife, I said, you did just see that, didn't you? You did. And of course, one of the most recognised things is that before a sort of geological event, it's a case of there is often a sort of increase in sort of psychic sort of events and stuff. Now, it's something that animals pick up on. And that was something we saw. What anyhow? So there was a couple of things. We had a classic thing like you come in and the TV was on and it was just like static, a bit like the sort of poltergeist thing. And by pure fluke, my little website got picked up by Fortean Times, the major sort of publication. And I was just going through lists of things happened. And overnight, the site suddenly got loads of attention. I had the Discovery Channel get in touch and say, "Oh, we want to visit." And at the time, we decided not to go ahead with it because we just thought, it wasn't the right environment at that time to be able to do it. But the reason why I mention this is because we think there might have been some sort of vortex or something in the house, because it was incredibly active. I mean, literally stuff moved around, not sort of like in the background. It moved around in front of you. We had our a puppy that unfortunately had to be put down after a few months because it had a congenital heart defect. I was sitting on the bed and I physically saw it come in and sit on the bed, and the bed then actually dipped where it was. And I've never ever been in the house. So that's been that active, and actually recently I tried to go back to the house, and obviously when you knock on the door of somebody, that who the hell are you? And they said, "Oh, have you had any sort of strange experiences?" And they've said, "Oh, no, nothing at all." So I don't know whether it was linked to us being in that property, or whether it was just a case that property was active for a particular time, or whether it is still active but the people aren't attuned to it and just don't recognise it.
There's another possibility, James. What if none of this is to do with the properties and it's all to do with you?
Well, this is really interesting, because it's a case of I am always very guarded against using the terms sort of psychic and mediumship, because in my experience, I have met some people that have been very good. I mean, very, very good, but they are very few and far between. And to be honest with you, it's also, how do you try and explain to somebody what you've seen? So, for example, I was at the spiritualist church, and we were this basically was it was literally a church hall. It's got 20 people from all sorts of different backgrounds in a circle. And I was looking at this guy, and he appeared as if there was smoke from coming out the chair, literally as if he was smoking a cigarette, or there was a fire that had been lit behind the chair. And I said, look, you know, in the spirit of being open and what we're seeing, but you look as if you're covered in smoke. And he kind of just went ashen-faced, and he said, this morning I was speaking to my wife, saying it feels like I'm walking in smoke, that I've been lost in something. And it was such a bizarre sort of thing to say. Now, again, there's no connection to that person. There's no reason why I'd think that. And you try and tell that story, and you go, right, well, you know, it's down to the provenance of the person. And so I think most of the challenge I have, which is why when I've started doing this, I've tried to put as much science behind it, is that I don't want people to take my word for something. I want there to be able to be a certain amount of credibility to try and sort of say, right, look, this is the information that we've got to hand. This is what we know. This is what physics tells us and stuff. Does this then explain some of what we're doing? I don't know. That's what the hypothesis is. This is why we're all here, you know, sharing our different experiences and our ideas, because what we're trying to do is collectively see, is there more than we're actually seeing?
Yeah.
Which I believe the answer is yes. You know.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the right approach, James, because there's almost like there's two camps, generally speaking, within the paranormal kind of field. You've got the ultra believers, so you've got them, maybe some of the most haunted crew, or kind of like
absolutely,
you know, where every little thing is something paranormal. You know, something falls over, oh my god, it's a spirit. Okay. Or you've got the ultra skeptics, where absolutely nothing, they could see a full manifestation of a ghost right in front of them, and they'd have a skeptical explanation for what that is. So it's kind of like the middle path, kind of like taking into account that it could be paranormal, or there could be a scientific rational explanation, but let's find out what it truly is, with a, you know, truth with a capital T. That's the most important thing. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you mentioned you know, the most haunted crew. We actually once did an investigation at the Ancient Ram. So that's the place in Gloucester. So John, passed away. John passed away a few years ago. We went there because we thought, right, so okay, and it was an invite only sort of thing you could go to. And so it was me and about 5 other people. And when we turned up at the property, it was very much almost like the opening scene of the sorry, not the opening scene, the scene from The Exorcist, where the priest walks in, because it was foggy. There was a light that was just basically shining outside the house. And I kid you not, we opened the door, and as we opened the door, this rush of cold air just went right in front of us. However, in saying this, there's a famous room in that building called the Bishop's Room, where you're not allowed to go in there unless you get this big cane, knock the door, and then basically the door opens up. So we were very interested in this, and it turned out actually that unfortunately the door had a loose hinge. Right. And so that when you actually bashed the door, it actually released the hinge, and then the door would open. Otherwise, the door was locked. And so it was kind of gutted about that. But the interesting thing was that the amount of people that came there and just basically just abused the property. You know, there were sort of apparently there were people that been there with sort of like satanic background that were trying to do all sorts of different things. I mean, John, at the end of the day, he just loved the house, and he wanted to try and raise the money to repair the house. Unfortunately, he didn't get the chance to do that. But this is the thing about sort of provenance, is that you have a property. There's definitely
something there because we experienced something there, but it's a case of then there's this sort of mythos which is all sort of built up around it that kind of almost then spoils the sort of the actual interesting active investigations that you can, that, you know, and again, this is why I'm not a big fan of these big sort of events, because often when you go there, you'll ask someone, well, why are you there? Oh, well, I liked Scream and I wanted to be jumped, you know, that sort of thing. And you go, well, you're obviously going to, you know, this is going to affect the sort of investigation that you're doing. So what I like to do is I've got like a little sort of box of instruments that basically records vibration, humidity, EMF, a few of the bits and pieces. It's probably the closest you'll get to the Ghostbusters device, but what I do is I use that to take like a cold reading of the house to see if there's any spike points there. And then what you do is you take that as your ground level first, and then you go through and see, right, are the people having any experiences in these sort of spiked areas and stuff? And that could be very useful sort of activity. And again, you kind of then work out, has there been any major events there? So again, has there been a energy imprint in the part of a room, which again, when I talked about, you know, you're having these sort of replay events, things like that. Mm.
I've just looked at the Ancient Ram Inn as we're talking, and this is the one that is apparently got some devilish or witchcraft background in history.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Funnily enough, some of the news reports are quite interesting, talking about carers who refuse to work there because it's the most haunted building in England.
Oh, God, yeah.
When John got quite ill, but what's really interesting about this, I'm a member of Spooky Isles in London. There's an Australian guy, David Saunderson. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's quite a nice chap. I've done an interview with him, and he runs all kind of like spooky tours and ghost tours, has a spooky website. And there's one of his speakers is a Scottish chap. I forget his name, but this is really interesting. Yeah, a Scottish chap with an interest in the paranormal, but he wants to believe it, but he doesn't quite believe it. He's quite skeptical, but still open-minded.
Yeah.
He went to the Ancient Ram Inn, and I've spoken to him, and he said it was one of the most peaceful, restful nights he's ever had. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because I've read other reports where, and I've forgotten where I read this, but there was apparently there used to be sleepovers in terms of charity sleepovers, and there were some doctors and nurses who didn't really believe in the paranormal, had a sleepover, and they just couldn't survive the night, and some of them actually tried to climb out the windows just to get away from the damn place.
Yeah.
So why did they have to escape the building as soon as possible? But the Scottish guy who I know, whose name I forget, sorry if you're listening, why did he have the most peaceful night he's ever had? Could it be to do with people's susceptibility or their perception of the universe or their belief in the universe?
Yeah, and this is a really, really good point that you've mentioned, because for me, I believe that the conscious mind is one of the strongest forces in the universe, in that you can use it to project, repel, interact with different things, but tailored with that is people's own belief system. In the same way that you can resonate with people, to build up your sort of psychic energy, you also resonate people and you get a collective empathy where basically you create a sort of empathic sort of connection where one person basically becomes very scared, and then that then triggers the next person and the next person. You get a domino effect that basically suddenly you've got 3 or 4 people there that have then gone and triggered everyone else. I think that again, it depends on how much experience that you've had, because again, we know we're not talking about amplification. Well, it's a case of if you are fearful of a situation, you hear something that then heightens your sense of alertness, awareness, and then what you do is you sort of focus on the slightest things, and that can then again create this sort of wider sort of panic. Whereas if somebody goes in somewhere that's naturally calm, has had experience, knows what to expect. I actually believe in that they have built up almost a sort of psychic defense. So when I go on a sort of investigation with people, I say, look, I'm an atheist, okay, and everyone here will have their own different belief systems. However, what I do believe in is that there should be a safe space before you go into a building where you basically ground yourself. And the idea of grounding is a really interesting principle, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, right, I'm grounding my energy in the in this sort of space, and this is a protected area, and you create that projection through your mind. And so you're basically saying, this is a bubble that I've protected, that basically you can that can't be penetrated. And then when you leave the building, you return to this, and again you say basically use this space to sort of like cleanse the area. Now these are quite new age terms, and you say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean cleansing stuff? It's all about the projection of the image in the mind. This is the most powerful tool that you've got, this projection, because this projection is what creates your belief in something. It creates your disbelief in something. But it's also, I believe, it's the same process of being able to connect with different phenomena, whether it be UFO, whether it be whether it be paranormal, because you have created this sort of this conscious sort of almost open door, which allows you to then be able to interact with energies that maybe someone who hasn't had that sort of experience, won't know how to deal with it. So again, that's why you'll then sometimes get that fight and flight response, where you hear a bang and everyone goes running in the other direction, and that can be one of the hardest things to combat. But I think one of the strangest experiences I've ever had, and it was the first time that I had done a paranormal investigation that had used a medium, and what it was a private investigation where we were asked to come into a house that there was a family there, and they were terrorized by why basically they said there was an entity in the room, and you came into the house, and the minute you walked through the door, there was a really strong smell of sulfur. I mean, it was really interesting, like a really strong smell of sulfur. And we went around, and the medium had picked up different things. And again, I'm very keen to say I'm not a medium at all. I'm not psychic at all. What I am, though, is I have an awareness of things, and what we discovered was that there was something there that basically hadn't passed over. We don't believe in there being good or evil, or we don't deal in such absolutes. It's just purely a case of that something was stuck that needed to move on. It couldn't move on, and it was blocking other people from moving on as well. So it was like it was like this one blocker. And when you say try and move on, well, what does that mean? And so what we did was we created a mental image of a door, and basically said, I can't take you through the door. It's up for you to walk through that door. And people go, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Essentially, you're imagining a door. Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. It is a mental image that you created. And once we moved this one person on, then the room filled with a smell of lavender. I'll always remember that. It was the most amazing thing, and in fact, even now, it actually causes my the hairs of my arm to pull up, because it was such a strong experience. And it was the first time that, because as part of that, once we moved one person on, we discovered that there was also a child in the room that basically was worried about going forward. And so again, my sort of mind's eye, I basically said, right, well, look, here's a door. I will hold your hand and take you through to the door. And I did that projection, and again, there was then this smell of lavender. Now the problem with all of this is that I've just heard me say that, and it's where's the provenance to believe what I've just said? You have literally hallucinated something, or it's a case of again talking about, you get a group of people together. You sort of put an idea into a group of people, and then it can be expanded, it can be projected. It's a case of, I can't tell you specifically, I can't tell you 100% what I experienced was genuine. I cannot say that for certainty because it isn't something tangible outside of human experience. But what I can say is that there's been 3 or 4 times when we've used that technique and there is a tangible change to the atmosphere in the room. And it's like you can go into a room and feel quite oppressed. And again, I believe this is down to frequency in the same way that sharks use electromagnetic wave to hunt down their prey. You immediately know if somebody comes into a room behind you. If you've got your back to the door, they can come in quietly, but you'll still know they're there because you will feel something. And again, it's that I'm kind of concentrating on. We know that there is a connection between 2 living beings at some level. It doesn't have to be a human to human, but it is a definite connection. You feel it as part of that electromagnetic sort of connection. You are trying to resonate with the frequency. Going back to that idea of the 2 tuning forks, you have that sort of transfer of information at a conscious level where you pick up on something else being in that room. And I think that if we go down the route that we take consciousness as a new potential fundamental law of nature, then I think we change that way of thinking. I think potentially that could open up other areas of physics that we haven't thought of, because it is something that is only seen as the fringe at the minute. And it's something that just a complete, and again, sometimes you have to come up with these ideas. It's like the guy that I remember, astronomy in the 70s, the guy that said there was water on Mars. He got laughed at. He got kicked out. Yeah. And yet here we go. Yes, it's now common. It's now some common theory that used to be water on Mars.
Yeah.
It's interesting you talked about sulfur, because that's been reported in many cases of UFOs where people said, oh, UFOs landed or it's just been sighted and you can smell sulfur. And it's a really weird thing. Why do you think that?
What's really interesting, Neil, is that's also the smell with demonic cases.
Exactly. And this is part of the challenge then with the whole sort of angels and demons, and that's why there's the whole sort of belief. And for me personally, if that is a belief system that that gives you warmth and happiness, then absolutely, I fully respect that. For me personally, I don't believe in those sort of absolutes. I think that what we have is we have manifestations from different dimensions. It's no different from when I was talking about the UFO, the ship itself actually being the intelligent entity, but it is referring to us through an avatar. I think it's very much a case of what we see is a manifestation of energy, and we interpret it in different ways dependent on our attunement to the surroundings.
Did we was the kind of the theory of UFOs and people seeing UFOs, did that come first in terms of people seeing UFOs, and then, for instance, the films and the comic books and the stories, or did the comic books, the films and the stories begin and then people started seeing UFOs?
So,
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so I actually did a paper on this a few years ago when I was at uni, and it was basically the how the UFO phenomenon had sort of impacted popular culture. And what's very interesting is that before Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the grey alien, and again, I'll have to citation is needed, but I'm pretty sure that the grey alien accounted for less than 40% of all alien sightings. Prior to that point, the classic alien whether it be abduction or interaction, they tend to be more Nordic looking. Right. So again, and that was, and there undoubtedly there was, it changed the way we look at aliens, and I think that when I started doing some additional research, there is, and again, I'm not a mathematician, so I can't speak about this confidently, but it was going back to Tesla. He was fascinated with the numbers 3, 6, and 9, and the reason, to the extent that he would only stop which had one of those combinations of numbers. And what happened was that there was something called vortex maths, which was built up around this. And what vortex maths is essentially if you take a circle and split it into 9 equal segments, and you have the numbers 1 all the way around to 9. If you basically connect the numbers, you find that you get a repeating sequence, and this repeating sequence is something that goes through nature, it goes through science. And what's interesting about the numbers 3, 6, and 9 is that they are absent from this recurring sequence. And they believe that 3, and again, like I said, I'm not speaking about this confidently at all, was 3 and 6 was used to explain basically the creation and the dispersal of matter. And it was also linked to certain musical frequencies, so that prior to 1939, I think it was, I'm just saying, bring it up, was saying that the orchestras were tuned in at I'm just seeing if I can find the find the frequency now. So
I've heard about this. This is going from a positive frequency to a negative one.
Yeah, that's it. So that basically, so what it was is so it was Goering and Goebbels, and the Nazis basically changed the frequency so that we're now all tuned to 44,000. I think it is what's tuned to. And what it has shown is that whether this is intentional or unintentional, but it also has an effect on the human consciousness. It acts as a dampener. And it's a case of and believe me, I haven't gone into this in any detail because it's still a lot of research going to. I think this is probably a rabbit hole sort of situation. But there is a lot of talk that says basically that coming in at this 44,000 sort of hertz it basically is out of tune with the human ear. It acts as a sort of dampener on consciousness. And it's something I would like to try and do some additional research in, just to see how this sort of affects people. Because there's a whole sort of, conspiracy theory is saying that our conscious mind is being dampened, is being reduced, and it's stopping our development. And and I know David Icke is someone that basically has talked about this at some level. I have a bit of love-hate relationship in that. I heard him talk, 30 years ago when he was a member of the Green Party, and he did one of the great pieces of environmental writing about how what the true cost was of plastic. So on that side of things, he's done some great stuff. On the Middle East stuff, that's been great. Some of the other stuff, though, I'm not so sure about. But again, frequency is something that he has spoken to at length, and talking about this dampening of the human consciousness.
So I've just quickly done a quick search for this, so you can have a look at globalnews.ca, and if you have a look at the chat, I've given a link for you guys. If people want to look at home, globalnews.ca, and then search for the Great 440 Hertz Conspiracy.
Yes.
And Why All of Our Music is Wrong by Alan Cross. And it even gives you an example. There's a video, 440 versus 432. So I'm thinking the full 432 is the positive, good vibration, yes, and the 440 is the negative vibration.
That's right. And the other bizarre thing was, when I was talking about the pyramids and the scale, I'm pretty sure it's using number 432 in scale to the pyramids, gives the dimensions of the Earth. Again, citation needed for that, but I'm pretty sure that that is the case, that it does actually have a musical notation. And when you hear physicists talk, they talk about the music of the universe, and I always find that a very, very interesting phrase. And again, going back to that vibration and frequency theory, that that's essentially what music is. It is a vibration.
Maybe this is why when people talk about their visits to the spirit world in astral projections or out of body experiences or something, they talk about how wonderful music is over there. They just say it's like nothing you've ever heard on Earth before. And it could be because they're doing the totally correct frequency for harmonious development on that side of life. Getting back briefly to the Close Encounters of the Third Kind alien, and you talked about the fact that not many grey aliens have been sighted. Well, there was lots of accusations from skeptics saying, everyone started seeing grey aliens because they saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They just got it from that. Well, apparently the production designer who designed the grey aliens for Close Encounters, they said, where did you get the idea from? And he said, well, I just researched into UFOs and aliens and found out that everyone was seeing these small little grey fellas, and so he copied his aliens from that.
This is kind of my point, Neil. What creates what? Is art creating reality, or is reality creating art? What came first? Because I think the first UFOs in popular culture were kind of like the Foo Fighters that people were seeing.
Yeah.
But were there ones before that? Because there were some paintings, even some kind of Middle Ages paintings,
absolutely,
depicting these fiery discs.
Yeah. I mean, just
and biblical sightings as well.
Yeah, and I think that part of this also feeds into potentially the future human theory. That what's happening is that you have future technology that is trying to be described by what is available to the people at that time, and that actually the nature of the phenomenon that we're seeing is changing as we become more aware of technology. So, for example, there's a piece of work at the minute where they are trying to create a silent supersonic vehicle that's currently being developed by NASA. And the way they've done that is to basically try and reduce the sort of contact points so that you don't get the buildup of pressure that causes the sonic boom. And that then creates a particular type of looking ship. And so, for example, when they were doing research into the best sort of shape that would allow you to travel, via warp speed, then surprise, surprise, it's a circular disc shape. That is
fantastic.
And
we are becoming the Greys.
This is it. And I think that I wonder where there will be a point where basically, where we recognise what's coming from the future, if that is what's happening, if it's coming from the future, at what point do we go, actually, that's pretty close to where we are now? Or it just takes us into a slightly different direction, and then suddenly we suddenly recognise more of the sort of phenomena that we're seeing.
Have you heard of Darryl Anka, James?
No, I haven't.
This is interesting. So he's a channeler, quite a funny channeler in America, and he's got this being called Bashar, who claims that he's a grey, but he's a future human, like many thousands of years ahead, where humans have basically morphed into greys, and that's what he claims he is.
Lost a bit of his colour then. What I was going to say in our closing part now, because we're really in the last few minutes of the show, I mentioned off air about the Seth material, and I think it's something that you should look into. So it's Jane Roberts and Seth. Now, Seth was the entity that she used to channel in the 60s and 70s and the early part of the 80s. She's now passed on herself. She was in America. So it's Seth, S-E-T-H. And he would basically talk about various things of like creating your own reality, the universe as an idea construction, and all sorts of stuff that, it's worth reading. Seth Speaks,
brilliant. Okay,
and also the Seth material, which is his first book that he did with her. You can buy them on Amazon and things like that.
Brilliant.
So it'll melt your head, but it's worth getting round,
Yeah, I mean, so go ahead.
I was going to say, Neil, am I right in thinking that Seth also says that he's an ET?
No, not to my knowledge. No,
because I could be getting this wrong. Because there's a portrait of him as a human, but then he went on to say that the real him is like ET.
Now there was a thing where Robert Butts drew this sketch of Seth. He somehow materialized in the hallway of their apartment, and so Robert Butts, that's the husband of Jane Roberts, being an artist, he drew him with an elongated head as he could see him.
Right.
And I do recollect something about ETs or aliens being mentioned in the conversation with Seth at that time, but for the life of me, I can't remember the details of it. But essentially, what he said was he was a personality essence, no longer focused in the physical. And he talked about that in previous lifetimes, i.e. reincarnation, he had lives with Jane Roberts and her husband, Robert Butts, in Denmark in the 1500s and other times and places. And at one particular point in history, instead of Jane Roberts in, say, the 20th century channeling Seth, he was a human and channeled her in a previous lifetime.
That doesn't surprise me. That really doesn't surprise me.
So, I think we've got to wrap up now, James, unfortunately, but we could go on all night. But if people want to find out more about your Universal Harmonics and your website, presumably they can go to your website. You mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a Facebook group. So if you just do a search on Facebook for Paranoia, that's Paralnoia. Just do a search there. It's a closed Facebook group. It's quite a small group, and I just use that really just to reach out to people, and would love to get people's sort of thoughts, people's feedback, because this is something I'm running with. It's something that I would like to try and publish a paper or write a book about, and so any sort of inputs, I would be delighted to hear from people.
Okay, and they can track you down on Facebook as James Brodie, I presume. And
that's right.
Request you. Cool.
Yeah.
And you're on LinkedIn, because you sent me a LinkedIn request the other day, which I've still got to reply to.
Okay, no worries.
So, cool. That's excellent. Well, thank you so much indeed for taking the time out for chatting to us tonight.
It's been really,
and I hope it's helped clarify your thoughts a little bit.
Cool. Absolutely.
Cool. And keep in touch, because we'd like to find out more of this spooky phenomena. You mentioned Dudley earlier on, where you live, and our last guest, which was Kieran, sighted a triangular UFO in that area, and he said that he was trying to trace it, and the only thing he came up with back then, I don't know what it was the Dudley Dorito. That must be something you've heard of, I presume. Yeah, flying triangle, nicknamed the Dudley Dorito. But I was interested because you talked about the earthquake in there and the frequencies, and then you got this Dudley Dorito flying around. I wonder if the whole thing's connected.
Who knows? It could well do. Certainly an area to research.
Makes me feel peckish, though, that's for sure. All right, well, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts, Andy, before we go?
I found the name of the Scottish guy, if you wanted to have a chat with him about his experiences in the ancient Ram Inn in Gloucester. If you go onto the Spooky Isles, which is quite a good channel in itself, you'll see an interview of me there somewhere. John Fraser spelled Fraser. He's the Scottish guy who had one of the most comfortable and restful sleeps he's ever had in the ancient Ram Inn, the most devilish
he
kind
must
of
have drunk loads
place.
of whiskey to get through it. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. You've been watching the Paranormal Peep Show at the Paranormal UK Radio Network with our guest James Brodie, and catch us next month where we'll be talking other strange, weird stuff. Tune in then. Bye for now.
Take care.